I'm Margaret. I'm 83 years old, and I need to tell you about the day my daughter Linda looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you really need to stop giving your opinion on everything. Nobody asked." We were standing in my kitchen. I'd made the comment that maybe she was working too much. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even new. I'd said similar things before. But this time, something in her voice was different. Flat. Final. Like she'd been holding that sentence in her mouth for months and finally spit it out. I remember my hand was on the counter. I remember the coffee pot was still warm. And I remember thinking, when did I become someone she talks to like this? If you're my age, you know that feeling. The slow realization that your children don't see you the way they used to. And if you're younger, maybe 40, 50, 60, and you're watching your own parents' age, please understand, this shift happens to almost everyone. The roles reverse, the respect fades, and nobody warns you how much it hurts. I didn't say anything back to Linda that day. I just nodded. She left 10 minutes later. I stood at the sink washing 2 coffee cups that didn't need washing, and I thought about all the years I'd spent raising her, the nights I stayed up when she had croup, the college applications I helped her fill out because she was too anxious to do it alone, the time I drove 4 hours to pick her up when her car broke down, even though Richard needed me home. And now I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I want to tell you what I did after that. But to understand why it mattered, you need to know how I got there. For years, maybe a decade, maybe longer, I'd been shrinking. I didn't notice it happening. You don't at first. It starts small. Your son interrupts you mid-sentence, and you let it go because he seems stressed. Your daughter makes a decision about your own house without asking, and you don't correct her because you don't want to seem difficult. Slowly, without meaning to, you teach them that your voice doesn't carry weight anymore. I'd spent so much of my marriage being quiet. Richard made the decisions. I kept the house. That was the arrangement, unspoken but absolute. And when he got sick, when he started needing me in ways he never had before, I thought finally, here's where I'm needed again. Here's where I matter. But caregiving isn't the same as mattering. I learned that too late. After Richard died, I thought my children would need me more. I thought they'd lean on me the way I'd leaned on my own mother after my father passed. But they didn't. They were kind in their way. They called. They checked in. But I could feel it. I'd become something they managed, not someone they consulted. So I tried harder. I started saying yes to everything. David needed me to watch his kids on a Tuesday afternoon even though I had a doctor's appointment. I rescheduled. Susan asked if I could help her move furniture even though my back had been hurting for weeks. I showed up. I thought if I stayed useful, I'd stay necessary. If I stayed necessary, I'd stay respected. But the opposite happened. The more I bent, the less they noticed. The more I gave, the more they expected. And somewhere in all of that, I stopped being their mother and became their convenience. The day Linda snapped at me in the kitchen wasn't the first time someone had spoken to me that way. Michael had done it a month earlier when I'd suggested he might want to call his brother more often. "Mom, stay out of it," he'd said, not even looking up from his phone. Patricia had done it the year before when I'd offered to help her repaint her living room. "I don't need you to fix everything," she'd said, sharp enough to sting. But Linda's comment was different. It wasn't angry. It was dismissive. Like I was a child who needed to be corrected. Like my thoughts were clutter she had to clear away. And I realized something sitting there in my kitchen after she left. I had let this happen. Not because I was weak, not because I didn't know better, but because I thought love meant accommodating. I thought being a good mother meant never making my children uncomfortable. I thought staying quiet would keep us close. I was wrong. The next time David called and asked if I could babysit, I said no, not rudely, not with an explanation, just, "I'm not available that day." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Oh, okay." He sounded confused, maybe a little put out, but I didn't apologize. I didn't offer an alternative. I just let the silence sit there until he said he'd figure something out and hung up. It felt strange, almost rude, like I'd broken a rule I didn't know existed, but I didn't take it back. A week later, Susan called. She wanted to know if I'd co-sign a loan for her. "Something small," she said, "just a formality." I told her I needed to think about it. She pushed. I held firm. "I'll call you back," I said, and I did, 3 days later, to tell her no. She was angry. I could hear it in her voice, that tight politeness that meant she was biting back what she really wanted to say. But I didn't fold. I didn't explain myself into the ground the way I used to. I just said, "I've thought about it, and I'm not comfortable with that." And then I changed the subject. These weren't big moments. They weren't dramatic. But each time I said no, each time I didn't apologize for taking up space, something shifted. I started noticing how often I'd been apologizing for things that weren't my fault. How often I prefaced every sentence with, "I don't mean to bother you," but how often I made myself small so they could feel big. And I stopped, not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, steadily. I started standing still instead of bending. The thing is, I thought this would make them angrier. I thought they'd pull away even more, and at first, some of them did. Patricia stopped calling for a few weeks. Michael's visits became shorter, more formal. Linda didn't bring Emma by as often, but I didn't chase them. I didn't call and apologize. I didn't try to win them back by shrinking again. I just lived. I started going to the library on Tuesday mornings. I joined a quilting group, not because I'm particularly good at quilting, but because the women there talk to each other like equals. Nobody interrupts, nobody dismisses. We sit around a table and work with our hands and say what we think. And it's the first time in years I've felt like my words have weight. I planted tomatoes in the garden, even though Richard always said they took too much work. I let the lawn grow a little longer because I don't care anymore if the neighbors think it looks messy. I started eating dinner at 5:30 because that's when I'm hungry, not at 7 because that's when everyone else expects it. Small things, ordinary things, but they added up. And then something unexpected happened. Linda called one afternoon, not to ask for anything, just to talk. She told me about a problem she was having at work, and I listened. When she finished, I gave my opinion, not forcefully, not like I was trying to fix her, just honestly. And she said, "That's actually really helpful, Mom. Thank you." I didn't make a big deal of it, but I noticed. David stopped by the following week without calling first. He seemed surprised to find me busy. I was getting ready to go to the quilting group. "Oh," he said, "I didn't know you had plans." I told him I did, and that I'd be home later if he wanted to come back. He looked at me for a second, like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Then he smiled. "Good for you, Mom," he said. It wasn't much, but it was different. The respect didn't come back all at once. It's still not perfect. My children still interrupt sometimes. They still make assumptions, but they're starting to notice when they do it. They're starting to correct themselves, because I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not waiting for their approval anymore. I'm not measuring my worth by how often they call or how much they need me. I'm just here, solid, present, not desperate. And that changes everything. I think about my mother sometimes, Dorothy. She spent her whole life accommodating my father, then accommodating us. I don't remember her ever saying no to anything, and I don't remember respecting her for it. I loved her, of course, but respect? That's different. Respect comes from watching someone hold their ground, from seeing someone know their worth and refuse to negotiate it down. I didn't learn that from her. I had to learn it myself at 83, standing in my kitchen after my daughter told me to stop giving my opinion. I'm not saying I did everything right. I'm not saying my children are villains or that I'm some kind of saint who finally found enlightenment. It's messier than that. But I do know this. The moment I stopped trying to earn their respect and started living like I already had my own, everything shifted. I'm not angrier now. I'm not bitter. If anything, I'm lighter, because I'm not carrying the weight of their expectations anymore. I'm not trying to be the mother they need me to be. I'm just being Margaret, and that turns out to be enough. Sarah noticed the change before my children did. She mentioned it one afternoon when we were sitting on her porch. Emma was inside coloring, and Sarah looked at me and said, "You seem different lately, steadier." I didn't know how to explain it, so I just said, "I stopped waiting for permission." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. Sarah's younger than me by 40 years, but she knows what it's like to shrink herself to fit other people's comfort. She does it with her boss, with her husband sometimes, with the other mothers at Emma's school who make her feel like she's never doing enough. "How'd you do it?" she asked. I thought about it. Then I said, "I just stopped saying yes when I meant no." It sounds simple, maybe too simple, but that's really all it was. Every time I wanted to say no and started to say yes out of habit, I paused. I asked myself, am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? And if the answer was fear, I said no. Not meanly, not with a long explanation, just no. The first few times it felt like I was doing something wrong, like I was being selfish or cold. But I kept doing it anyway, and eventually it stopped feeling wrong. It started feeling right. My children don't need a mother who says yes to everything. They need a mother who knows her own mind, who stands in her own truth, who teaches them even now that self-respect isn't optional. I can't give them that lesson by disappearing into their needs. I can only give it by living it. There's a moment I think about sometimes. It was a few months after I started saying no more often. Linda and I were having coffee, just the two of us, which almost never happens anymore. She was telling me about a situation at work, something complicated with her boss, and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're just going to tell me what to do." It stung, but I didn't defend myself. I just said, "I won't if you don't want me to." She looked at me, surprised. Then she said, "No, actually, I do. I want to know what you think." So I told her, not as a directive, not as a fix, just as my honest opinion, offered without attachment to whether she took it or not. And she listened. That's when I realized she didn't stop respecting me because I had too many opinions. She stopped respecting me because I stopped believing my opinions mattered. The moment I started believing them again, not loudly, not aggressively, just quietly and firmly, she heard me differently. I'm not going to tell you this fixes everything. I'm not going to tell you that if you just set boundaries and reclaim your voice, your children will suddenly treat you the way you want to be treated. Some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them need more time. Some of them are carrying their own pain, their own patterns, and it has nothing to do with you. But here's what I know for certain. You can't control how they see you. You can only control how you see yourself. And the day I stopped seeing myself as someone who needed their validation, the day I stopped measuring my worth by their calls, their visits, their approval, was the day I got my dignity back. Not because they gave it to me, because I took it. I think that's what I wish someone had told me years ago. That respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you embody. And the people who love you, really love you, will rise to meet it. The ones who don't? Well, that tells you something too. And maybe that's the hardest part. Accepting that even your own children might not be capable of seeing you clearly. Not because you failed, but because they're human, flawed, limited, just like you. But you don't need them to see you clearly to know your worth. You just need to see it yourself. I'm still learning that. At 83, I'm still practicing. Still catching myself when I start to apologize for taking up space. Still reminding myself that my time, my voice, my presence, they matter. Not because of what I've done, but because I'm here. And if you're listening to this, wherever you are in your life, please know, you matter too. Not because of how much you've given, or how well you've loved, or how many people need you. Just because you're here. That's enough. You're enough. And the moment you start living like you believe that, really believe it, everything else begins to fall into place. Not perfectly, not immediately, but steadily, quietly, like the sun coming up after a long night. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd sit with me again. There's more I'd like to say, more I'm still figuring out. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.